Look, we've got the data, right? The science is there, the physical proof of a warming planet is literally all around us. So why do we collectively just freeze? Well, it turns out this isn't a failure of technology or science. It's actually a fascinating, deeply ingrained psychological mystery.
Welcome to This Explainer! When you dive into the research on cognitive bias and sustainable decision-making, you hit this wild realization. The exact same survival instincts that kept our ancient ancestors alive are now actively sabotaging our modern climate goals. Crazy, right? But hey, the good news is we can actually outsmart ourselves.
Okay, let's dive right in. Here's our structured roadmap for demystifying this inner evolutionary saboteur. We'll start with the sustainability paradox, look at our Stone Age brains, identify those cognitive roadblocks, talk about hacking human behavior, and finally, weigh the ethics of nudging.
So, Part 1, the sustainability paradox, unprecedented wealth versus planetary health.
Think about the rapid, explosive growth of science and technology over the last few centuries. It's given us unimaginable comfort. We've tackled food shortages, cured diseases, and seen incredible economic welfare. But this modern comfort comes with a devastating ecological toll. Just wrap your head around this number: 230,000. Back in the Stone Age, a human survived on about 4,000 calories of energy a day. Today, the average modern American lifestyle, your car, the heating, all those screens, burns through a staggering 230,000 calories of energy every single day.
And here is the truly sobering reality of that. If everyone on Earth lived this exact high-energy lifestyle, we would need 4 entire planets to sustain us. 4! And obviously we only have the one. We all know this, so what exactly is stopping us from taking decisive preventative action?
That brings us to Part 2, our Stone Age brains, and the root cause of this inaction.
You know, it's incredibly easy to just blame human laziness or greed or ignorance for environmental collapse. But the research actually shifts the blame to our biological hardwiring, specifically cognitive bias. The source defines these as systematic, universally occurring tendencies in human decision-making that make us vulnerable to suboptimal outcomes. Basically, they are built-in glitches. They aren't just occasional oops moments. They are predictable decision-making patterns that feel completely natural and self-evident to us. We rarely even realize we're being biased, simply because our brains are just not optimized for modern, complex, long-term global crises.
And this brilliantly illustrates the staggering mismatch between our ancient brains and our modern world. In primordial conditions, our rapid mental reflexes, what psychologists call heuristics, were fantastic. I mean, if you heard a rustle in a bush, you ran. Quick, practical, survival-focused. But today, those exact same intuitive mental shortcuts have become risky and short-sighted. Our brains prioritize immediate, visible threats and completely ignore abstract long-term dangers, like the massive infrastructure and climate failures happening right around us.
Moving to Part 3, cognitive roadblocks to sustainability, why we get stuck. When we're dealing with environmental issues, a huge limitation we run into is a principle psychologists call "what you see is all there is." Basically, if a problem isn't triggering our immediate senses, our brain struggles to even process it. The source labels this specific roadblock experiential vagueness. See, human senses evolved to detect sharp contrasts, like a predator leaping out at you, or a sudden freezing drop in temperature. But climate change? It's gradual and abstract. Because we can't physically see a half-degree rise in global temperature, or smell a slow decline in biodiversity, our sensory-driven nervous system completely fails to sound the alarm.
So what do? That's Part 4. Hacking human behavior and turning these biases into solutions.
Seriously, if we are literally wired to ignore the crisis, how do we fix this? Well, instead of fighting a losing battle against human nature and just lecturing people to be better, policymakers can pragmatically use these very biases to our advantage. Let's unpack hyperbolic time discounting. It's a fancy term, but it's the exact same reason we'll choose a donut today over a healthy heart 10 years from now. We want immediate gratification. Asking people to sacrifice today for a cleaner atmosphere in 2050 goes against every primal instinct we have.
So we hack it. We satisfy that need for instant gratification by bringing the rewards into the present. Policymakers have to make the sustainable choice the most immediately rewarding choice today. Give immediate tax breaks for green choices. Subsidize solar panels so the financial payback is practically instant. And tax fossil fuel usage so the quote-unquote pain of that choice is felt right now, not a decade down the line. It's about making sustainable choices pay off right now.
Now, what's really interesting here is another massive hurdle called the tragedy of the commons. This is our hardwired tendency to prioritize our own self-interest over the shared good of the community. Natural selection strongly favors individuals who look out for themselves, right? So when there's an unregulated shared resource, like the oceans or the atmosphere, our primal instinct is to just overexploit it for our own gain before someone else gets the chance.
To hack the tragedy of the commons, we actually have to leverage that very selfishness by invoking kinship. We share genes with our family. So instead of asking people to save some abstract concept of Mother Earth, environmental campaigns are vastly more successful when they emphasize protecting our children and our grandchildren. We literally just have to stretch that biological selfishness a tiny bit forward to include the protection of our immediate genetic line.
But quick warning here, beware the cobra effect. The name actually comes from a famous anecdote in colonial India, where the government offered a cash bounty for dead cobras to reduce their numbers in the city. The result? Enterprising locals simply started breeding cobras in boxes just to collect the reward. It perfectly illustrates the perverse incentive effect. If we don't thoroughly think through these interventions, poorly designed climate incentives will totally backfire and just create more destructive behaviors. Then, of course, there is our absolute obsession with social status. Evolutionarily speaking, higher social status meant better survival odds. Today, it's become this hedonic treadmill, where we constantly compare ourselves to our neighbors, demanding the newest phone, the bigger car, the nicest clothes. This evolutionary urge to just keep up with the Joneses fuels endless, completely unsustainable resource depletion. So, instead of fighting that urge for social dominance, let's hack it. What if we reframe green choices as ultimate luxury symbols? Make an electric car the hottest new status symbol. Use admired influencers to make sustainable fashion exclusive and highly desirable. If a solar panel becomes a mark of scarce, exclusive social status, our evolutionary wiring will literally compel us to buy them.
Which leads us to part 5, the ethics of nudging, a democratic gray area.
We clearly possess the psychological tools to basically trick our Stone Age brains into acting sustainably. But is it ethical for governments to intentionally use psychological manipulation to steer citizen behavior? The researchers reflect deeply on this complex implication, concluding the evil is not in the instrument, but in the purpose for which it is used. Nudging is ultimately just a neutral tool. Throughout history, it's been used for horrific, destructive propaganda, but also for immense democratic good. The ethics lie entirely in the hands of the architect. And that leaves us with a pretty profound tension to consider. Is it ethical for governments to manipulate our evolutionary biases, even if the ultimate goal is to literally save the world? It is a remarkably fine line between necessary climate policy and psychological manipulation. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. And hey, the next time you make a choice, ask yourself, who is really making the decision? You or your Stone Age brain?